Chapter 1. The apartment she thought defined me. I raised my daughter alone, and I thought I gave her everything that mattered. But the day she walked into my old apartment and told her friends it smelled like a time capsule, she didn't just insult my home. She erased years of sacrifice with one careless smile. She said I was making her look poor, that I wasn't good enough for the wealthy family she wanted to marry into. She never asked what I truly owned, never cared to look past peeling paint or secondhand furniture. She didn't know that the building she mocked, the block she called a ruin, was mine, all 14 buildings. And she didn't know that the day she screamed at my manager or the night she told me to sell everything so I wouldn't embarrass her, the truth was already moving toward her like a storm. My name was on every deed she dismissed. And when my lawyer walked into her engagement party asking for my signature in front of everyone, she finally learned who I really was. I am Marian Ole, the woman she thought was nothing. And this is the story of how my daughter discovered the price of disrespect. I was wiping down the small kitchen counter when I heard the quick, confident footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. They always walked like they owned the world, heels clicking with the rhythm of people who expected doors to open before they touched them. A moment later, the handle turned and my daughter Ava stepped inside with the kind of smile that was more performance than warmth. She was 32 now, sharp angles and sharper ambition, wearing a tailored cream blazer that looked like it had never known a wrinkle. Behind her came Stephanie from her PR firm and a man I had not met before, a coworker she had mentioned once in passing. They carried the scent of new leather seats and department store perfume, a scent that always felt foreign inside my modest home on Alder Street in Portland. Ava scanned the room with the same subtle wince she used whenever she found something she thought was beneath her expectations. Her eyes slid over the old wooden dining table I had refinished myself, the slightly uneven hardwood floors from the 70s, the soft light filtering through curtains I had sewn years ago. Stephanie gave a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. The man glanced around with open curiosity, trying and failing to hide it. Ava spoke in that bright tone she used when she wanted to show she was unfazed. "Mom, we were in the neighborhood, so I thought we would drop by." Her voice carried an undercurrent of tension, as if she needed to justify why she was here at all. I simply nodded and stepped back so they could enter fully. My apartment was not large, just 2 bedrooms and a combined living and dining area, but it was comfortable. It held the pieces of my life that mattered: the ceramic bowl from a trip to Santa Fe, the bookshelf filled with well-worn novels, the framed photo of Ava at 9 years old, grinning with the gap in her front teeth. Sometimes it felt like a different child lived inside that photo. Stephanie moved closer to the wall, pretending to admire a print I had bought at a neighborhood market. She lifted her phone slightly, as if checking the time, giving me a quick glance. "This place has such a vibe," she said with an exaggerated warmth. "It feels like one of those retro houses you see on old postcards." The man chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, definitely a throwback. It's got that vintage smell, too." Ava let out a small, breathy laugh and swatted at the air, as if brushing away a speck of dust. "It is charming in its own way. Mom likes rustic comfort." I watched her carefully. She was pretending to be amused, not embarrassed, but her shoulders had stiffened. She always tried to hide it, but she had never been good at hiding her discomfort in this apartment. I offered them water, and they declined. I asked about their workday, their plans for the weekend, and they answered politely. But the subtext was loud. They were guests in a world they thought was beneath them. As they moved around the living room, Ava kept adjusting small things without fully realizing it. She straightened the lamp, she moved a stack of books an inch to the side, she smoothed the couch cushion. It was something she had done as a teenager too, whenever friends were around. She wanted everything in my home to look better, newer, more expensive. It always felt like she was trying to rewrite me into someone I never been. My voice stayed steady as I asked how work at Helix Bridge Marketing was going. She launched into a story about a major campaign she was leading, how her team was pushing for a spot in a big tech conference in Seattle, how she had been networking with executives. Her face lit up as she talked. Success had always given her oxygen. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet. Stephanie leaned in and lowered her voice slightly. Ava says you have lived here a long time. It is quaint, like someone older who lives alone. There was no cruelty in her tone. It was worse than cruelty. It was pity dressed as flattery. The man added while looking at the ceiling, I don't think I have ever been in a place like this. It's kind of a time capsule. Ava finally stepped between them in the center of the room, as if trying to control the narrative. Mama's comfortable here. She has her routines. You know how older neighborhoods are. Her words landed harder than any insult could ever be. Not because she called me older, but because she said it to reassure her friends, not to reassure me. I studied her silently. The expensive watch on her wrist, the sleek hair that she paid to maintain every 2 weeks, the smooth confidence that covered a nervous energy she tried so hard to suppress. I remembered the version of her who used to sit cross-legged on this floor, drinking hot chocolate, dreaming of becoming a dancer or an illustrator. I remembered the first day she told me she wanted to work in tech because people in that industry looked important. Somewhere between 25 and 30, my daughter traded authenticity for appearance, and she never looked back. While Stephanie wandered toward the hallway and the man examined the old rotary dial thermostat like it was an artifact, Ava moved closer to me. She spoke quietly. Her voice tightened. Mom, I know you love this place, but you cannot keep living here forever. You know Ethan and his family care a lot about how things look, and, well, when they come in town, I just don't want them to get the wrong idea. The wrong idea about what? I asked. About you. About us. She pressed her lips together. You know how they are. They have expectations. I'm trying to make everything perfect. It's exhausting already. She had no idea how her words scraped across the surface of old wounds. I smiled faintly. I knew she meant the Ward family, especially Linda, a woman who carried social image like a shield. I said gently that I had lived here for over 20 years and I wasn't planning on moving unless I wanted to. Ava sighed, frustrated. You know how people talk, Mom. And with the engagement coming up, I just can't have anything messing with the image. The image. Always the image. Somewhere along the way, my daughter learned to value the surface of things more than their substance. She stepped back and gestured at the living room. This is fine for now, but you need something more appropriate. The Word family will think I'm irresponsible for letting my mom live in a place like this. You should consider moving to a nicer building, something downtown or at least closer to the riverfront, something modern. I listened quietly, keeping my face calm. Only I knew the truth she had never bothered to ask about. My signature sat on the deeds of 14 buildings in this very neighborhood. The apartment she dismissed so easily was part of a block I had renovated slowly and intentionally since 2011. I kept it modest because it served a purpose. It protected the tenants who had trusted me. It kept me out of the spotlight. It allowed Ava to grow without feeling overshadowed by my financial decisions. I thought humility was a gift. Somehow it had become a burden. When Stephanie returned to the living room, Ava cleared her throat and said with a nervous laugh that she couldn't let me show up to her engagement party dressed the same way or coming from this place. Her voice rose slightly. Mom, I can't let you appear like this at my engagement. People will wonder. There it was, the sentence that drew a line through the center of the room. For a moment, no one moved. Stephanie blinked at Ava as if she had not heard correctly. The man looked away awkwardly. Ava tried to soften her tone, but the damage was already done. I stood still. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend myself. I simply let her words settle in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I watched my daughter, the girl I raised alone, the girl I loved with a depth she could not yet understand. I watched her standing in my home, acting as if my worth depended on the walls around me. Inside my chest, something shifted. Not anger, not grief, something quieter. A realization that the distance between us had grown wider than I had allowed myself to see. I thanked them for stopping by. Ava hesitated, as if she realized she had crossed the line, but pride kept her silent. They said they had another appointment and left with the same confident footfalls that had arrived minutes earlier. The door closed behind them. The apartment felt quiet again. The familiar hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. I walked to my desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a thick folder bound with a rubber band. I placed it on the table and removed the band, revealing the deeds, contracts, and renovation plans for the 14 buildings I had accumulated over the years. My handwriting filled the margins with notes, dates, and signatures from a decade of steady work. I rested my hand on the top page, letting the weight of the paper censor me. I had spent years hiding the truth to protect her. But Ava had changed. She valued things she could see and judge. She forgot the things she could not. The papers lay in front of me, like a quiet reminder. Secrets do not vanish. They wait. They wait for the moment when they can no longer be ignored. I closed the folder slowly, feeling the edges of the pages pressed against my palms. I did not know yet how that moment would unfold, but I knew one thing with certainty. The truth would not stay hidden forever. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Daughter I No Longer Recognized. A few days passed before Ava texted, asking if I was free for dinner at a place she described as perfect for discussing the engagement. The restaurant was in the Pearl District, one of those dimly lit spots with hand-blown glass light fixtures and menus printed on heavy cardstock. I arrived a few minutes early and stood outside watching the evening crowd flow in and out, all tailored coats and curated conversations. It was the kind of place Ava loved, and the kind of place I usually avoided, unless absolutely necessary. I spotted her at a corner table. She waved me over with a smile that looked glued on, the kind she used in work meetings when she wanted to pretend everything was polished. She wore a sleek navy dress, hair pinned in a style I could never imagine being comfortable in. Next to her sat Ethan Ward, 34, clean-cut, handsome in the way young executives try to be, every detail precise. Across from him was his mother, Linda, a woman who looked like she had never had a hair out of place in her life. I approached the table and Ava leaned close as I sat down. "Mom, remember, tonight is simple. Let me do the talking. Try to be yourself, but maybe keep things light. No long stories. And maybe avoid mentioning your apartment. Some topics make people read things the wrong way." I let her words settle, without comment. A server came by with water and took our drink orders. When she left, Ava cleared her throat and introduced me as if they were meeting a colleague instead of her mother. Ethan smiled politely and said it was great to finally have dinner together. Linda examined me with a calm, assessing gaze and said she had heard wonderful things. Her tone was polite, but there was a faint edge to it, something like quiet skepticism wrapped in courtesy. We talked through the first course, or rather, they talked while I listened. They asked about my work, and I kept the answer short, saying I had been involved in small-scale property management for years. Linda tilted her head slightly and asked whether I had ever considered moving somewhere more updated, something with better proximity to downtown. The question carried a softness that did not hide the judgment underneath. I smiled and said I was comfortable where I was. Then Ethan brought up a conversation he had earlier that day with a potential investor for Ward Analytics. He explained their company was preparing to restructure one of their commercial partnerships and mentioned a building on the east side that was causing delays. He described it in detail, enough for me to recognize it instantly. It was one of the older structures in the Alder Street block, a property I had purchased in 2016. I lifted my glass of water slowly, careful not to let my expression shift. Ava did not catch the connection. She only shifted in her seat, eyes bright as she leaned into Ethan. That building is such a mess. I have seen it. I swear the whole block looks like it is stuck in a time loop. She shot me a sideways glance. Mom lives near there. She's seen it too. Right, Mom? I held her gaze for a brief moment and answered simply that the neighborhood had its charm. Linda lifted a brow and exchanged a look with her son. They were trying to hide it, but the message was clear. This does not align with our family. When the entrees came, the conversation shifted to the engagement party. Ava pulled out a notebook with color-coded tabs and went over table placements, photograph backdrops, floral arrangements, outfits, and guest lists. At one point, she paused and said she already had a stylist ready to help me find something appropriate. Her fingers brushed my sleeve lightly as she added that certain colors photographed poorly, and some outfits made people look older on camera. I stared at her hand for a second before moving my arm away gently. My voice stayed warm as I thanked her, but told her I knew how to dress myself. Ethan offered a polite smile, though there was a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. It was the first time I sensed he realized his future wife was trying too hard to manage everything and everyone around her. We made it through dinner without any raised voices, but the tension sat like a third presence at the table. When the check came, Ethan reached for it. Ava insisted on checking it herself to make sure the gratuity was correct and that the total matched the reservation notes. Linda lightly scolded her, saying she needed to relax. Ava responded with a strained laugh and said she just wanted everything to be perfect. When we left the restaurant, the cool night air brushed against my face, a welcome contrast to the heavy atmosphere inside. Ava hugged Ethan and Linda goodbye before turning to me. She asked if I wanted a ride home. I told her I would walk. It was only a few blocks to the streetcar, and I enjoyed the quiet. I thought the night was over, but around an hour later, my phone rang. Ava did not bother with small talk. Mom, I have to be honest. Tonight was hard. The way you dressed, the way you talked about your neighborhood, it made things awkward. You look like you didn't even try. I sat down on the edge of my bed and let her words wash over me. She continued talking, her frustration climbing. Ethan's mom asked if you ever go out. They think you're stuck in some old routine. It made me feel like I've been hiding things. I closed my eyes and inhaled slowly. Sometimes silence is only the space where emotions can breathe. Ava took that permission to keep going. And the outfit you wore, she added, her voice sharp, it's outdated. It makes you look older. Mom, you can't dress like that around his family. It makes me look unprepared. I'm trying to step into a new phase of my life and you're not helping. The line went quiet for a beat. I could hear her breathing, quick and uneven. Then she said the one thing that sliced through all the noise. If you would just sell that old block or whatever it is, you could live somewhere better. At least then you wouldn't look so poor. My chest tightened. Not because she was cruel, but because she truly believed what she was saying. I let the silence stretch until she finally asked if I was still there. "Ava," I said softly, "what do you think poor looks like?" She didn't answer right away. She exhaled heavily, muttered something about being stressed and having too much to manage, then said she would call me tomorrow. The line disconnected. I sat there for a long time, the room dim, except for the streetlight outside casting a soft glow across the floor. I changed out of my clothes, folded them neatly, and placed them in the laundry basket. My movements were calm and steady. On the surface, I was composed, but inside, something was shifting, realigning, taking its true shape again. The next morning, my attorney Peter Dawson called to remind me that we had documents ready for the upcoming renovation funding. He told me the lenders needed my signature within 3 weeks to secure the rate and timeline. I thanked him and said I would stop by his office the following week. When we hung up, I stared out the window at the street below. A delivery truck pulled up. A couple holding hands walked past, laughing about something soft and private. A cyclist maneuvered around a parked car with practiced ease. Life moved with its steady rhythm, unchanged by my daughter's judgment. I pushed the window open slightly and let the fresh air fill the room. The neighborhood was old. It was imperfect. It had history, and it had been mine to care for since 2011. I had watched these buildings transform from neglected structures into functioning homes for people who needed them. I had learned every crack in the sidewalk, every squeaky stair in the corridors, every tenant's story. I had protected this block and the people in it. Ava had never asked why. She had never wanted to know. I spent the rest of the day walking through the neighborhood with my hands tucked inside my coat pockets. The street lamps flickered on as the sun dipped behind the hills west of the city. When I reached the corner where Alder Street met Lansing Avenue, I paused and looked at the line of buildings stretching before me. My buildings, my responsibility, my quiet legacy. There was no anger left in me, only a gentle ache. Ava had crossed the line, but not because she meant to hurt me. She had let the world shape her so tightly that she could no longer see beyond its surface. She had forgotten that value is not measured in square footage or granite countertops or new paint. It is measured in how we show up for people, in what we protect, in what we build quietly without applause. I turned toward home, my footsteps slow and steady on the old pavement. Tonight, I would sleep easily, not because everything was fine, but because clarity had settled in. My daughter was no longer the girl in the photo by my bookshelf. She had become someone I barely recognized. And for the first time, I understood that I could not pull her back. She would have to find her way to herself again. The streetlight outside my apartment flickered as I reached the door. I stepped inside and let the warmth surround me, my mind already drifting toward the day I would have to decide how much truth she was ready to see. Chapter 3. When disrespect meets reality. The next morning, Ava texted asking if we could meet for coffee near her office. The message was short. No greeting, no warmth, just a time and an address in the Northwest District. I walked there in the crisp afternoon air, passing storefronts and small parks where people lingered with their dogs. When I reached the cafe, Ava was already inside, at a corner table, tapping her fingernails against her phone. She did not stand when I approached. She barely looked up. I sat down quietly. She exhaled sharply, as if preparing for a difficult task. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." Her tone was firm, in a way that seemed rehearsed. I waited. She folded her hands, leaning forward with a seriousness I had rarely seen. "I think it is time that I help manage your finances. You have worked so long and you have done everything alone. But handling property, even small property, gets complicated at your age. I can organize things. I can help make sure you do not lose money or end up in a bad deal." Her words sounded like concern, but her eyes carried calculation. I felt a gentle heaviness settle in my chest. Ava had crossed into a space I never imagined she would. I said nothing at first. I just held her gaze until her confidence faltered. Finally, I asked why she thought she needed to take control of anything. "Because you need help," she replied quickly. "You have been living the same way for years. You do not think about long-term strategy or growth. You just sit still. And with everything happening with Ethan and his family, it is making things harder for me." Her voice thinned on the last sentence. Harder for her, not for me. I leaned back slightly. "And what exactly does Ethan have to do with your managing my money?" Ava hesitated, choosing her words. "He just thinks you might have some assets that could be used in a smarter way, something that could help his company stabilize. They are evaluating expansion and some restructuring. I told him you might have property that could fit the plan. Something underused." I stared at her, letting the quiet stretch long enough for her confidence to chip away. "Ava," I said softly, "you have no idea how complicated managing property is, and you have no idea how unnecessary it would be for you to get involved." Her jaw tightened. "That is exactly what I'm talking about. You do not understand modern markets. You do not know how much money you are leaving on the table. For all you know, your place is worth nothing compared to what you could be doing with it. If you let me help, we could figure out which assets to sell." I listened, still calm. She truly believed I owned nothing more than the small apartment she mocked. She believed she was the one with the vision. Part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Instead, I folded my hands. "Ava," I said, "what exactly do you think I own?" She waved her hand impatiently. "A unit or two, maybe. Something old. Something nobody would want now. That block is practically decaying. You could get something out of it if you sold quickly. Ethan thinks so too." I did not react. I simply took a slow breath and let her speak until she felt satisfied she had convinced me. When the conversation died down, she stood abruptly and said she had to get back to work. Before she left, she touched my shoulder in a gesture meant to appear tender. "Mom, let me help. It's for your own good." I watched her walk away through the glass windows, shoulders squared, head high, believing she had shifted something important, but all she had done was reveal how far she had drifted from everything I had taught her. Later that week, as if trying to prove she could take initiative, Ava showed up unannounced at Alder Street. I heard about it only after the confrontation had already happened. She had decided she needed to evaluate the property in person, hoping to convince me to sell. She must have imagined she could walk through, take pictures, talk to the construction crew, and return with a convincing proposal. The reality was nothing like she imagined. According to Parker, the building manager, she arrived during the busiest part of the day. Crews were on site, safety barriers were up, and signs clearly marked restricted access. It was a typical afternoon for us, but not for someone like Ava. I received the call from Parker that evening. He sounded tired but steady when he said he needed to tell me what had happened. I placed the phone on speaker and listened while making tea. Ava came during the busiest part of the day, he said. She showed up with attitude. She said she wanted to see the interior for a potential sale. She tried to step past the barricades. I closed my eyes briefly. I could imagine her tone, her posture, the way she pointed her finger. "Did she get inside?" I asked. Parker sighed. "No. I stopped her at the entrance. She said she was evaluating the property. I told her she needed authorization. She insisted she had a right to see it and said the owner would agree." "What did you say?" "I told her I worked for the property owner and that she definitely did not know who that person was and that she could not enter without authorization." The more calm I stayed, the louder she became. Then she stormed off. I wrote my temples briefly. "What did you tell her then, Parker?" "I told her I worked for the property owner and that she definitely did not know who that person was and that she could not enter without authorization." The more calm I stayed, the louder she became. Then she stormed off. I thanked him for letting me know. Before we hung up, he added quietly that several residents had asked if Ava was all right, that she seemed deeply upset, almost frantic. After the call, I sat at my table for a long moment. I felt no anger, just a deep, steady ache. My daughter was clawing at things she didn't understand, trying to manipulate pieces that didn't belong to her. She wasn't harming me, she was harming herself. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity nudged me to answer. He began with a soft greeting. "Marion, I think there was a misunderstanding today. Ava told me you visited your neighborhood and things got tense. She's under a lot of pressure. The wedding plans, work, everything is piling up. I hope the building manager wasn't too harsh." I stayed quiet long enough that he repeated my name. I finally said that Parker had simply done his job. There was nothing personal in it. He cleared his throat. "Right, yes, of course. Still, Ava feels embarrassed. Maybe you could talk to your team, ease things a bit. And if by any chance you ever consider selling or partnering on commercial space, we might know some investors who could help you get a good return. We could all benefit, especially you." I almost smiled at the irony. Here he was, fishing for financial opportunity, not knowing that the building he wanted access to was already mine. I thanked him politely and said I would keep it in mind. There was a long pause on his end, before he murmured that Ava was sensitive right now and needed support. Then he wished me a good evening and ended the phone call. The next morning, I walked through Alder Street alone. The sun had just come up, casting a pale golden wash across the sidewalks. The street was waking slowly. A florist was setting potted plants outside her shop. A man in a puffy jacket walked his dog, waving as he passed me. A couple of tenants coming out of the bakery smiled and greeted me warmly, asking about my week. I felt something soften in my chest. Here, in this space I had protected and nurtured for more than a decade, I wasn't judged by surface impressions. I was known. I was seen. As I moved past the building where Ava caused the scene, Parker stepped out of a doorway and nodded respectfully. "Everything is under control now," he said quietly. "People already forgot about yesterday." I thanked him for handling things professionally. He gestured toward the property line. "We're making good progress," he added. "The renovations should be completed before winter if the loan clears." I stood with him for a moment, looking at the scaffolding, the fresh beams, the careful work being done. Progress had always been slow and intentional. It was never meant to impress anyone, It was meant to last. When I continued walking, several residents stopped to chat. One older woman asked if I wanted some lemon bars she had baked. A teenager from down the block held open a gate for me and introduced me to his new puppy. A maintenance worker tipped his cap and told me the heating system in one of the buildings was running smoother since last week's adjustments. Every interaction was small, ordinary, woven into the rhythm of a life built on quiet consistency. And every interaction stood in sharp contrast to the chaos my daughter had created only a day earlier. As I reached the corner of the block, I slowed my steps. The morning light hit the brick buildings in a way that made them look almost warm. I felt calm, steady, grounded. I knew Ava was spiraling in a direction she did not understand. I knew she was making choices that would come back to her. But for the first time, I also understood that I could not shield her from the consequences. I could only be here, standing on this sidewalk, watching the block I had built with my own hands, in my own patience, continue to stand solid. The contrast was impossible to ignore. The neighborhood held me with kindness and familiarity, while my own daughter drifted farther from the person she once was. I stayed there a while longer, letting the quiet settle around me before finally turning toward home, ready for whatever truth was waiting to be revealed next. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The Block She Never Imagined I Owned. The night of the engagement party arrived with the kind of chilly sparkle that only Portland winters could create. I stepped out of the rideshare in front of the Harrison Grand Hotel, its glass exterior glowing against the dark sky. Valets rushed forward to open car doors, while guests in tailored coats and glittering dresses streamed inside. I could already hear the muted hum of music drifting from the ballroom level. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of lilies and polished marble. A staff member guided me toward the elevator bank and up to the 12th floor where the event was being held. As soon as the doors opened, I spotted the welcome sign with Ava and Ethan's names written in looping silver script. Guests milled around, complimenting decorations, greeting each other with hugs. Ethan's family dominated the center area like a well-rehearsed production. His father, Charles Ward, stood near the dessert table talking to a group of businessmen. His voice carried easily, full of practiced authority. As I made my way closer, I heard fragments of their conversation. Charles was frustrated about delays in a redevelopment deal. Something about a building owner refusing to back down on negotiations, their stubborn stance slowing down Ward Analytics' timeline. "We cannot keep bleeding time like this," he said. "The whole block is poorly managed. Whoever owns that mess is making everything harder than it needs to be." Ethan joined in, sounding annoyed. "We already offered favorable terms. If the owner had any sense, they would sell. The place is dated and half the tenants do not fit the market we are targeting." I lifted my glass slowly, keeping my face composed. They were discussing one of my buildings, yet again. The same commercial property on Alder Street that they had tried to approach through intermediaries. They had no idea they were insulting the person standing only a few feet away. Then Ava slid into the conversation, eager to impress. "Honestly," she said with a knowing laugh, "the whole Alder block looks like it was renovated with thrift store leftovers. I have seen better work in student housing. Whoever is running those buildings is clearly overwhelmed. They probably can't afford to do it right." Several people chuckled. Someone murmured that maybe Portland really was behind the times. I stayed still. A part of me wanted to tell her the truth right then, but the larger part waited, patient, steady. The truth was coming on its own. A server passed with glasses of champagne. I declined. The music softened and the lights dimmed slightly as more guests arrived. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, letting the steady ambiance calm the tension building under my ribs. Halfway through the evening, as dessert plates clinked and guests posed for photos, a hotel staff member approached our area. He stepped close to Ava and spoke quietly. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Marion Cole?" Ava stiffened. She turned to me sharply. "Why? What did you do?" I frowned, confused. The staff member gestured toward the hallway. "There is a gentleman asking to see her. He said it is time sensitive." Ava's voice dropped to a heated whisper. "Mom, not now. Please do not make a scene. Whatever this is, it can wait." Before I could respond, Peter Dawson stepped into view holding a slim folder under his arm. He was dressed in his usual charcoal suit, expression calm and professional. "Marion," he said with a nod, "I am sorry to interrupt, but the bank sent over the final documents for the Alder Street project. They require your signature to keep the funding window open." A hush rippled outward like a sudden temperature drop. Conversation slowed. People turned. Even the music seemed to fade. Peter continued, not noticing the attention. "These are the approval forms for the renovation loan. They need your signature as the owner." The owner. The word hung in the air. Ava's eyes widened. Ethan's jaw slacked. Charles stared at me as if I had materialized out of thin air. Ava whispered, "Mom, what is he talking about?" Her voice trembled. I felt more fear than curiosity in it. Peter opened the folder and held out the pen. "If you could sign the first page, Marion, we can keep the timeline on schedule. The lenders are expecting confirmation tomorrow." All around us, the room had gone strangely still. People were pretending not to stare, but their attention was locked on the table. Ava looked from the folder to my face and back again, her mouth parting as comprehension dawned. "Mom," she finally breathed. "You own Alder Street, all of it." I met her eyes, calm and steady. "I've owned a block for years. You just never asked." Ethan blinked rapidly. His father's gaze sharpened like he was recalculating every word he had spoken earlier. Linda pressed her lips together in a thin line, suddenly far more attentive. Ava's face flushed. She looked like she was struggling to breathe. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me talk about that place like that?" I signed the page Peter indicated, handed the pen back, and closed the folder gently before answering. "I never needed anyone to be impressed, Ava, and I never wanted you to see me through the lens of money." Peter thanked me and stepped away. Conversations in the room began to resume slowly, but the air still vibrated with shock. Ethan approached me, clearing his throat, trying to recover. "Marion, we had no idea. The properties on that block are significant assets. Impressive, really. If we had known." "If you had known," I said quietly, "you would have treated me differently." He faltered, searching for the right expression. Charm, respect, interest. All of it rang hollow. Ava's voice cut through the noise, sharp and trembling. "So you let me embarrass myself? You let me think you were struggling. You let everyone think that." I looked at her, taking in the panic swimming in her eyes. "I never told you to think I was struggling. You chose to." Her face twisted. "You could have made everything easier. You could have fit in. You did this to make me look foolish. My voice stayed soft, but it carried across the table. Ava, you are not ashamed because I lived simply. You are ashamed because you believed I had nothing worth showing. That comes from you, not me. Her breath hitched. Anger surged across her features, mixed with something rawer, something like humiliation cracking open. She shook her head violently as if trying to fling off the truth clinging to her skin. I can't believe you. I can't believe you would do this to me. Her voice barely steady. She turned and pushed through the crowd, disappearing down a hallway. Several guests stepped aside to let her pass. Ethan followed her but stopped halfway, unsure whether to chase her or pretend nothing had happened. His parents remained rooted to their spots, watching me as if re-evaluating every assumption they had formed in the past hour. I excused myself from the table and walked toward the balcony doors. The cool night air brushed against my cheeks as I stepped outside. The city lights shimmered below, a spread of gold and blue reflecting off the river. I rested my hands on the balcony rail and allowed the quiet to settle around me. I felt no triumph, only a heaviness I couldn't shake. Marion wasn't a villain. She was lost in a world she desperately wanted to belong to. She had mistaken image for identity and approval for worth. And somewhere along the way, she had drifted so far from herself that the truth felt like an attack rather than a revelation. The wind stirred my hair gently as I stood alone, the sounds of the party muffled behind the glass doors. The city felt strangely peaceful in contrast to the chaos inside. I stayed there for a while, letting the lights of Portland wash over me, unsure of what the night would bring next, but knowing that nothing between us would ever be quite the same again. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. Owning the Block, Not the Grudge. A month passed in a quiet rhythm that did not belong to the chaos of the engagement party. Winter settled deeper into Portland, softening the edges of the streets with rain and early dusk. News traveled fast, even when people tried to hide it. I heard through a former colleague of Ava's that Ethan had called off the engagement. The official explanation was vague, but the truth filtered out anyway. He told his friends he could not move forward with someone who had not been honest about her background or her family. At Helix Bridge, whispers started about inconsistencies in Ava's reporting, and a minor review sparked a deeper look. She lasted 2 more weeks before she was asked to leave quietly, without the usual farewell email or team gathering. I continued with my own life. There were renovation permits to approve, tenant meetings to attend, and planning sessions with Parker. He and I walked the length of Alder Street often, reviewing structural updates and energy-efficient upgrades. I kept my focus steady, letting work anchor me. One rainy Wednesday evening, I returned home with grocery bags in each hand. I was sorting vegetables onto the counter when a soft knock came at the door. It was so gentle I almost thought I imagined it. When I opened the door, Ava stood there. She looked smaller somehow. Her hair was unstyled, tied back carelessly. Her eyes were swollen, the skin beneath them a deep shade of exhaustion. She had no makeup on, no jewelry, no mask of confidence. Just my daughter, stripped down to a quiet, trembling truth. "Mom," she whispered, "can I come in?" I stepped aside and she walked in slowly, almost as if afraid the room might reject her. She stood in the center of the living room, staring at the floor, hands twisting together. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her voice cracked. "I lost everything." She sank onto the couch, shoulders folding inward. I waited. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand like she used to do as a child when she was afraid of disappointing me. Ethan ended things. He said he needed someone he could trust, someone who did not pretend, someone who understood honesty. She let out a shaky breath. And Helix Bridge said I misreported something in a client brief. I didn't mean to. I was just trying to look competent. But they said they could not overlook it. I listened without interrupting. She kept talking, the words spilling like a confession she had been holding back for years. My friends stopped reaching out. I think they were embarrassed to be around me when everything fell apart. I do not blame them. I was so busy trying to be someone I am not, trying to look like I belonged somewhere I never did. She pressed her palms to her eyes. I don't know who I am anymore. My instinct was to pull her into my arms, but I stayed where I was. Not out of anger, out of something gentler and heavier. Boundaries were necessary now, not comfort. She needed honesty, not rescue. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely audible. I'm sorry, Mom. I was horrible to you. I do not know why I kept trying to turn you into something you are not. I guess I was ashamed of being less than everyone else. I sat down slowly across from her. Not less, I said quietly, just unsure of yourself. That is different. She swallowed hard. I hated my childhood sometimes, not because of you, because I felt like other kids had nicer houses and richer families. I tried so hard to outrun that feeling that I tripped over everything else, including you. A long silence settled between us. I could feel the years of unspoken pain rising like a tide neither of us had learned to control. Mom, she whispered, does it make sense? Does it make sense that I felt jealous of everyone? Even jealous of people on the internet who had perfect lives? I was ashamed that you lived so simply. I thought it meant something about me. I nodded slowly. It makes sense, but it doesn't make it right. She looked down again. I know. I just never really saw what you built. I never asked. I never cared to look. I leaned back, letting my voice stay soft. I love you, Ava. I always have. But love is not the same as unconditional forgiveness. Respect has to be rebuilt, not assumed. We cannot go back to what we were before. We can only move forward if you are willing to be honest, not perfect. Tears finally slipped from her eyes. She said, I want to try again. I want to be better. I want to understand you. Please give me another chance. I stood and gestured for her to follow me. We left the apartment together and stepped into the evening air, walking side by side down Alder Street. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the street lamps. At the first building, Parker was talking to a maintenance worker. When he saw me, he waved. Everything is on schedule, he said warmly. The tenants are happy about the solar upgrade. He nodded politely to Ava, then continued down the walkway. We kept walking. Residents greeted me with familiarity. A teenager waved from his bike. A couple thanked me for addressing the heating issue. As we turned the corner, Mrs. Hill, a retired teacher who had lived there for 15 years, spotted us and hurried over with her cane tapping lightly against the concrete. Oh, Marion, she said, smiling wide. We were just saying nobody looks after us the way you do. You are a blessing to this block. She wrapped her arms around me briefly, then turned to Ava with a kindly nod before shuffling off. Ava watched her go, her face breaking open with emotion. She wiped her cheeks again. All this time? She whispered. All this time? I thought you were living small. I never realized you were living big in ways that mattered. I touched her shoulder lightly. It was never about being big or small. It was about being true to myself. Wealth only means something if you use it well. You ran from the wrong things, Ava. You chased shadows. Her voice wavered. Can I start over? I exhaled gently. Yes, but starting over doesn't mean climbing back up to where you were. It means beginning at a place that's honest. She nodded. I think I want to work somewhere that doesn't care what I look like, somewhere that helps people, somewhere real. A few days later, Ava sent me a picture of an acceptance email. She had applied to a nonprofit housing organization that supported low-income families. They offered her a junior coordinator position. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with fancy events or wealthy friends, but it was hers. It was honest. Weeks passed, and each time she came home from work, she looked a little more grounded, a little more like the girl I once knew. She talked less about image and more about people, less about approval and more about impact. She was learning to stand on her own again, not on the idea of who she thought she had to be. One afternoon, I walked past the community center and saw her crouched beside a family unpacking boxes. She was showing their little girl how to plant herbs in recycled containers. The child laughed, and Ava laughed with her, genuinely, freely. I stood there for a moment watching her, feeling something loosen inside me. Pride, relief, gratitude. She had fallen hard, but she was learning to rise the right way. As I turned to leave, the wind carried the scent of the river up the street. The block felt alive, strong, honest, just like my daughter was learning to be. Sometimes the gentlest form of justice is simply living a life that stands on truth. When others misjudge you, let your actions speak louder than anger. Let time and integrity carry the message forward. And when respect finally returns, welcome it with boundaries, not bitterness.